They say funerals reveal the truth, not just about the dead, but the living. And I didn't understand that until the day soldiers tried to bar a young woman from honoring the only man who ever believed in her. If you believe that respect should never depend on rank or appearances, make sure to like this video and subscribe, because what happened next is a lesson every uniformed service member should hear. I remember the moment it began. A cold November morning, overcast skies hanging low above Arlington National Cemetery, the kind of day where even the air felt respectful. Rows of soldiers in dress blues lined the path leading to the lieutenant general's funeral, their white gloves sharp against the gray horizon, their posture flawless. Everything seemed orderly until she stepped forward. Her name was Talia Monroe, late 20s, dark curls tucked behind her ears, wearing a simple black dress and a worn silver pendant that she kept touching like it anchored her to something deeper. She didn't look like anyone connected to a three-star general. Too young, too unassuming, too quietly composed. But she walked with a strange mixture of grief and determination, the kind that made you wonder what story she carried behind her calm face. I watched from a distance as she approached the path leading to the front row, the section reserved for family, dignitaries, and select Department of Defense personnel, spaces normally guarded tighter than a vault. And that's when the line of soldiers tensed. A captain stepped in front of her, lifting a white-gloved hand like a barrier. "Ma'am," he said sharply, "this section is restricted. Family only. Turn around." She paused, not offended, just surprised, as if she hadn't expected resistance. "I am family," she replied softly. But the soldiers laughed. Not loudly, not cruelly, but with that clipped military skepticism that said they'd already decided who she was. Nobody. The captain tilted his head, scanning her from shoes to pendant with the dismissive thoroughness of someone searching for the thing that proves their assumption right. "Your father was a lieutenant general?" he scoffed. "With respect, ma'am, this isn't a place to take selfies or sneak in for photos. Please return to the public area." And I swear, it was the way she flinched at the word selfie that made something in my chest twist. She didn't look offended, just quietly wounded, like someone had taken a memory she treasured and trivialized it. She tried again, her voice steadier this time. "I'm not here for photos. General Whitaker was my mentor. My guardian." "Guardian?" the captain repeated, eyebrows arching. "Ma'am, the general didn't have children." She swallowed but didn't back down. There was history in her eyes. Old grief, new pain, and a determination that didn't match the fragile way she held herself. "I know he didn't have biological children, but he raised me." The soldiers looked at one another. Some snickered, some smirked, and a few simply stared, unsure what to do with a young woman claiming a closeness they couldn't imagine. "Ma'am," the captain said again, this time with irritation sharp enough to cut. "This is a ceremony for officially recognized family and invited personnel. You're not on the list. Please step back." But Talia didn't move. Instead, she reached into her bag and pulled out a folded piece of paper. Old, creased, well kept. "I have a letter," she said. "From him." The captain didn't even look. Anyone can print a letter. A murmur swept through the rows of soldiers. I saw one sergeant mouth the word wannabe. Another shook his head. Someone quietly whispered, "She's lying." It was the dismissiveness, the casual ease with which they stripped her of dignity, that made the air vibrate with quiet tension. And through it all, Talia stood as still as a statue, gripping the letter like it was the last piece of him she had. "Please," she whispered. "He wanted me here." "Enough," the captain barked. "Step back or you'll be escorted out." And that was when her hand, trembling slightly, brushed against the silver pendant around her neck. The soldiers didn't notice, but I did. It wasn't just jewelry. It was carved with 3 stars and etched initials, LW. Lieutenant General Landon Whitaker. The pendant wasn't a trinket. It was personal, intimate. The kind of gift he would only give to someone who mattered deeply. But the soldiers were too focused on her youth, her civilian clothes, her quiet presence. They saw nobody. A nuisance. Not family. And when the captain waved over 2 MPs, signaling that he was done entertaining the story of a grieving young woman, something shifted in the air. Because just then, quietly, without ceremony, the crowd parted behind us. And in that instant, every soldier's spine went rigid. The chief of staff of the army walked forward. 4 stars. Full authority. The kind of presence that turned discipline into instinct. The soldiers snapped to attention. The captain stiffened, hands locking at his sides. Talia looked over her shoulder, her breath catching, not from fear, but recognition. Because the chief of staff was looking directly at her. Not confused, not curious, not skeptical, but with something close to heartbreak. And in the silence that followed, he said the words that froze the entire funeral detail in place. "Why are you blocking the general's daughter?" And just like that, everything the soldiers believed, everything they mocked, collapsed beneath the weight of truth. What I remember most is the silence. Because when the chief of staff stepped between the rows of uniforms and walked straight toward me, it didn't feel like a hush had fallen over the funeral procession. It felt like the entire world leaned in. A moment earlier, I'd been standing frozen at the edge of the ceremonial field while the lieutenant general's casket, draped with the flag, carried by pallbearers moving with devastating precision, made its slow, final journey toward the memorial platform. And I, a woman in my late 20s, barely removed from the dust and grit of the humanitarian mission that had tied me to the general's name, had been told, mocked, really, that I didn't belong. They hadn't seen me as anything more than an intruder in a borrowed black dress, someone who must have taken a wrong turn, as the sergeant with the too loud laugh had said. The other soldiers, younger but eager to impress him, had joined in quickly, forming a loose wall of bodies that barred the path to the seating area reserved for dignitaries and those with actual clearance. They didn't bother lowering their voices. "She's not even in uniform," one muttered. "Looks like a civilian trying to get a closer look for Instagram," another sneered. They didn't ask my name. They didn't ask my reason. They didn't ask why I had a silver-trimmed badge clipped to my lanyard, or why the plastic covering had a gold seal instead of the usual blue. They just assumed. And assumptions, when made loudly enough, draw a crowd. I felt the humiliation wash down my spine like someone had cracked open a bucket of ice water along my back. I wasn't here for attention. I wasn't even here for closure. I was here because the lieutenant general whose funeral this was, Lieutenant General Raymond Hale, had saved my life long before he ever knew my name. That wasn't something these soldiers could have guessed. How could they? They hadn't been there the night Hale ordered his convoy to stop in the middle of an active corridor, against protocol, to evacuate a civilian team caught in a collapsing compound. They hadn't been there when he barked at the radio officer to keep the channel open until every last person is accounted for, even while the other commanders were urging retreat. They hadn't seen Hale's face illuminated by the burning skyline, the calm, the certainty, as he sent his drivers forward to extract people he'd never met, people like me, a young humanitarian liaison barely 22 at the time, who had been pinned under wreckage when an airstrike caught the wrong coordinates. Hale didn't know me then, but he pulled me out, and he gave me a coin afterward, not the ceremonial kind tossed around during morale events, not the ones with unit mottos stamped into them like souvenirs. This was etched with a simple phrase, "Return when ready." He never explained what it meant, and I never saw him again, not until today. That was why I was trying to step forward when the soldiers blocked me. That was why I had the clearance badge. But they didn't see that. They saw a young woman in her 20s, unaccompanied, not in dress uniform, and they decided I didn't belong. "Ma'am," back of the crowd. The sergeant had barked, flashing a grin to the others. "Families only past this point. I'm here as an invited guest," I'd said quietly, trying not to disturb the solemn quiet around us. He rolled his eyes in full theatrical disdain. "Sure you are." When I tried again, calmly, professionally, to step past them, his hand landed on my elbow. Not rough, not violent, but dismissive, commanding. Wrong. I think that was the moment the chief of staff saw what was happening. Because suddenly the formation shifted, not from discipline, but from tension, and the crowd parted like someone had pulled an invisible thread. General Marcus Cole didn't walk fast. He didn't need to. His presence carved space around him. The soldiers who had blocked me stiffened immediately, their faces draining of color. As the four-star approached with a quiet that felt sharper than a shout, he didn't look at them first. He looked at me, and the expression he wore, recognition, surprise, and something else, something that almost looked like grief, made my breath catch. "Miss Rowan," he said, using my last name, his voice low but carrying clearly through the still air. "Why weren't you escorted to the front?" The sergeant's jaw dropped. One of the younger soldiers actually choked on his breath. "Yes, sir. She She didn't identify herself. She didn't need to. Cole replied without raising his voice. It was worse than yelling. It was controlled, icy disappointment. You failed to recognize someone the general himself placed on the priority guest list. The sergeant's eyes snapped toward me, panic blooming across his face. Sir, I didn't know, but Cole wasn't finished. You didn't ask, he said calmly. You assumed. That single sentence felt like it echoed across the entire field. Cole stepped closer to me then, his voice softening in a way that stung unexpectedly. I'm glad you came, he said. He spoke of you more than once. I blinked hard, because those were not words I had ever imagined hearing. He did. You returned his coin, the general said quietly. When he got the package, he told me. She kept her promise. My throat tightened painfully. I had mailed the coin back only after I learned of Hale's passing, enclosing nothing but a note with 2 words. Thank you. Cole turned then, positioning himself between me and the soldiers who had mocked me moments earlier. Escort Miss Rowan to the front, he ordered, and treat her with the respect owed to someone the lieutenant general trusted. The soldiers scrambled instantly, their earlier smug authority replaced with mortified obedience. As they led me through the crowd, this time with deference instead of derision, I felt hundreds of eyes on me. Not in judgment anymore, in curiosity, in dawning understanding. And somewhere behind me, I heard Cole murmur, to no one and everyone. Hale didn't save many people personally, but the ones he did mattered. That was the first moment I understood. I hadn't just been invited. I had been expected. I've replayed that moment so many times, the one where the formation of soldiers parted without a single word, like a tide commanded by an invisible force. And standing in the open path they created was the one man none of us expected on that quiet cemetery hill. General Marcus Hale, Chief of Staff of the Army, his 4 stars gleaming even beneath the overcast sky. What struck me wasn't the rank, nor the silent power that seemed to follow him like a shadow. It was the flicker of grief around his eyes when he saw me. Grief, and something else, recognition. And in that instant, every soldier who had mocked me, blocked me, questioned why a woman in her late 20s was trying to get closer to the funeral of a lieutenant general they assumed I had no connection to. They suddenly realized their mistake was far larger than they understood. The silence that fell over that field wasn't fear. It was shame. General Hale stepped forward, slow, deliberate, every bit of his posture radiating the authority these soldiers had tried to hold over me. I didn't move. I think part of me still couldn't believe what was happening. Only a few minutes earlier, I'd been standing at the edge of the seating area, my past dismissed as misprinted, my age mocked with quiet smirks, and my insistence on being allowed closer brushed off as disrespectful. Ma'am, this area is restricted to next of kin, one sergeant had said with a condescending tilt of his head, as though I had no idea what those words meant. Another had chuckled. Next of kin wouldn't be someone your age, now would it? Even as I explained, calmly, carefully, that I was next of kin, their expressions hardened with suspicion instead of understanding. To them, I was just an entitled young woman trying to sneak closer for some unknown reason. Nothing more. But when General Hale stopped right in front of me and removed his cap, everything froze. Captain Rowan Carter, he said, his voice low, carrying farther than sound should allow. My name, my rank, hung in the air. You shouldn't have had to walk in here alone. The soldiers around me stiffened, their eyes snapping toward me and then back to him, confusion dawning into humiliation. Some of them had heard the name before. Some would realize it seconds later. Others wouldn't understand until far after today. But the shift was immediate. The sergeant who'd blocked me earlier swallowed hard. The young specialist who'd asked if I was lost stared at the ground. And it was only then that General Hale extended his arm, not for a handshake, but for something far more intimate, more reverent. He gently placed a small, folded black cloth into my hands. He carried this with him every deployment, he murmured. Said it reminded him who he fought for. I unfolded it, fingers trembling despite myself. It was the corner of an old unit flag, tattered, worn, smoke-marked, and embroidered with the call sign only 2 people ever used for me, Bluebird. My throat clenched. Memories of desert heat, firelight flickering off scorched metal, the roar of an engine dying beneath us, and my father's voice, stern, steady, unwavering, rushed through my mind. Lieutenant General Samuel Carter had never been a man of gentle displays. His love was measured in discipline, in expectations, in the relentless pride he carried for the soldiers he led. But this scrap of fabric, he had kept it. All these years. I didn't realize I was shaking until General Hale touched my elbow lightly and said, "Come with me." The soldiers stepped aside as we moved past them, the weight of their earlier arrogance pressing into the ground like invisible boot prints. I didn't look at them, not because I wanted to spare them embarrassment, but because none of this was about them anymore. The funeral detail stood at rigid, perfect attention as we approached the front row, seats reserved for dignitaries, commanders, and family. Until that moment, I hadn't been allowed anywhere near them. Hale motioned for me to take the seat directly beside him, the one marked with a small plaque labeled family. My name had been there the whole time, tucked beneath the metal plate. They had covered it accidentally when arranging the flowers. But instead of checking, instead of asking, the soldiers had assumed a young woman couldn't possibly belong there. When the casket draped in the flag was carried forward, it didn't feel real. I'd seen coffins lowered before, too many during deployments. But seeing his was a different kind of pain. Each honor guard step echoed like a heartbeat. Slow, deliberate, irrevocable. As the chaplain began to speak, General Hale leaned toward me, his voice barely above a whisper. "He talked about you constantly," he said. "Said you had more fighting you at 22 than most officers have at 40. I didn't trust myself to speak. Hale continued. "He told me once that if anything ever happened to him, you'd be the one strong enough to carry the legacy he left behind." I closed my eyes against the sting, because there, in front of the world, he was leaving it to me in the only way that mattered. In ceremony, in honor, in memory. The rifle volleys cracked the air. Sharp, violent, final. I didn't flinch. Old instincts held me steady, even as the sound rolled through my bones. The folded flag was presented next. The young soldier who delivered it knelt before me, hands trembling, not from fear, but reverence. "On behalf of a grateful nation," he said, his voice wavering, "please accept this flag in memory of your father's honorable and faithful service." I took it, not because I needed closure, but because he deserved dignity. When the ceremony ended, the soldiers who had questioned me earlier approached, clearly ordered to apologize. But before they could speak, I shook my head. "Learn from it," I said quietly. "Next time, listen before you judge. Your assumptions nearly turned a moment of honor into a moment of disgrace." They lowered their eyes, each one visibly humbled. General Hale walked with me to the car, silent until the last few steps. "Bluebird," he said softly, the nickname warming and wounding me in equal measure. "He would have been proud of you today." For the first time in years, I believed it. As I drove away from the cemetery, the flag in my lap and the scrap of our unit banner beside it, I realized something with startling clarity. Grief wasn't the final chapter. Legacy was. And my father hadn't left me a burden. He had left me a mission. To rise. To lead. To honor. And above all, to never let the world forget who he was. Or who I had become.